The story of the Roman emperors begins not with a single stroke of the sword or a singular declaration, but through a slow and strategic consolidation of power by a young man named Gaius Octavius, known later as Augustus. Following the assassination of Julius Caesar in 44 BCE, Rome teetered on the brink of collapse. The Roman Republic, which had survived for centuries, could no longer sustain the immense pressures of civil war, military expansion, and internal corruption. Into this power vacuum stepped Octavian, Julius Caesar's adopted son and heir. Over the next few years, Octavian outmaneuvered his rivals, including the charismatic Mark Antony and the Egyptian Queen Cleopatra, culminating in their defeat at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE. 3 years later, in 27 BCE, Octavian offered to relinquish all power back to the Senate, who in return bestowed upon him the title Augustus, meaning the revered one. In this act, Rome formally transitioned from republic to empire, and Augustus became the first emperor. Augustus ruled for over 40 years, establishing the imperial system that would dominate the Mediterranean for the next 5 centuries. His reign ushered in the Pax Romana, a period of relative peace and prosperity. Augustus skillfully maintained the facade of republican institutions while holding absolute authority. He reformed the military, reorganized the administration, and promoted moral legislation. He adopted Tiberius, his stepson from Livia Drusilla's previous marriage, positioning him as his successor. Augustus died in 14 CE at the age of 75, leaving a legacy of stability and a blueprint for emperorship that many would try and fail to follow. Tiberius, the second emperor, reigned from 14 to 37 CE. Though a capable general and administrator, Tiberius lacked the charisma and warmth of Augustus. His rule was marked by increasing paranoia and detachment, especially after the death of his son Drusus. Eventually, he withdrew from Rome entirely, spending his final years in self-imposed exile on the island of Capri. In his absence, Rome fell under the influence of the Praetorian prefect Sejanus, who carried out purges and plotted his own rise to power. Tiberius eventually discovered the conspiracy and had Sejanus executed, but the damage was done. By the time of his death in 37 CE, Tiberius was widely disliked, and rumors abounded that he had been smothered to death to hasten the ascension of his successor. That successor was Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, better known as Caligula, the great-grandson of Augustus and son of the beloved general Germanicus. Caligula's initial reign was greeted with celebration. However, his time as emperor from 37 to 41 CE quickly descended into madness. While some modern historians argue that Caligula may have suffered from a mental illness, ancient sources depict a man who declared himself a living god, made his horse a priest or possibly a senator, and indulged in extravagant cruelty. His short reign was marked by reckless spending, humiliation of the Senate, and erratic behavior that alienated both the aristocracy and the military. In 41 CE, Caligula was assassinated by members of his own Praetorian Guard in a bloody palace coup. In a twist of fate, Caligula's uncle Claudius was discovered hiding behind a curtain in the palace and was proclaimed emperor by the Praetorian Guard. Despite being physically disabled and considered a fool by many in his family, Claudius proved to be an able and energetic ruler. Reigning from 41 to 54 CE, Claudius undertook significant administrative reforms, expanded the empire's borders into Britain, and improved the legal system. He also reorganized the bureaucracy, relying on capable freedmen to manage the growing complexities of the imperial administration. However, his personal life was marred by scandal, most notably his marriage to his niece Agrippina the Younger, who was rumored to have poisoned him in 54 CE to ensure the succession of her son Nero. Nero, the last of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, ruled from 54 to 68 CE. His early reign was guided by wise advisors, including the philosopher Seneca and the prefect Burrus, and saw a relatively competent administration. But over time, Nero grew more self-indulgent, obsessed with the arts, and paranoid about threats to his rule. He executed his own mother Agrippina, later his wife Octavia, and many senators. The Great Fire of Rome in 64 CE further tarnished his image, especially after rumors spread that Nero had started the fire himself to make room for his Golden House, a massive palace complex. He blamed the Christians for the blaze, initiating the first imperial persecution of the fledgling religious group. Nero's popularity plummeted as military revolts broke out, and in 68 CE, facing certain execution, he committed suicide, reportedly uttering the words, "What an artist dies in me." The death of Nero marked the end of the Julio-Claudian dynasty and threw Rome into chaos. With no clear successor, the empire entered the so-called Year of the Four Emperors, where a rapid succession of claimants Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and finally Vespasian fought for control. But before diving into that period of instability, it's important to reflect on the Julio-Claudian dynasty as a whole. It set the precedent for hereditary succession, even though the line of descent was often convoluted, involving adoption and marriage alliances rather than direct patrilineal inheritance. It also revealed the vulnerability of the imperial system. While Augustus had been a master of image and administration, later emperors ranged from competent to cruel to catastrophic. Each emperor from Augustus to Nero contributed to shaping what it meant to be the ruler of the Roman world. Augustus created the mold, the princeps or first citizen, cloaked in republican garb but wielding autocratic power. Tiberius maintained the system but grew suspicious and secretive. Caligula broke the illusion of moderation and divine favor, showcasing the dangers of unchecked power. Claudius brought back administrative efficiency, but his personal weaknesses left him vulnerable to manipulation. Nero, with his excesses and cruelty, ultimately shattered the dynasty, prompting a re-evaluation of imperial legitimacy and succession. Throughout this period, the Senate struggled to maintain relevance. Reduced to a rubber stamp institution under the emperor's shadow, the Praetorian Guard, originally formed as a protective unit for the emperor, became kingmakers with their own interests and ambitions. Provincial governors and legions, too, played crucial roles in supporting or opposing emperors, a theme that would recur throughout Roman history. The Julio-Claudian dynasty thus laid the foundations, both structurally and symbolically, for centuries of imperial rule. In foreign affairs, this era saw the stabilization and modest expansion of the empire's borders. Under Augustus, Rome secured Egypt, parts of Central Europe, and the Alpine regions. Tiberius largely maintained the status quo, preferring defense to expansion. Caligula launched a bizarre campaign in northern Gaul, rumored to have ended with him ordering his soldiers to collect seashells as spoils of war. Claudius succeeded in bringing parts of Britain into the Roman fold, while Nero's reign included uprisings, such as the Revolt of Boudica in Britain and the Jewish Revolt in Judea. These developments showcased the growing strain of managing such a vast and diverse empire. Religiously, the period saw an increasing emphasis on the imperial cult. Augustus carefully aligned himself with divine imagery without outright deification during his life. Later emperors pushed the boundary further, demanding worship and instituting state-sponsored rituals. This trend would have profound consequences, especially with the rise of Christianity. Philosophical schools such as Stoicism gained traction, especially under Seneca's influence, while traditional Roman religious practices persisted alongside localized cults across the provinces. By the time of Nero's death, Rome had transformed from a city-state republic into the heart of a vast imperial machine. The mechanisms of power were still evolving, and the balance between military strength, senatorial support, and public favor remained delicate. The Julio-Claudians had established the imperial tradition, but had also exposed its weaknesses. What followed in the next years would test the very fabric of the empire. The first part of this timeline draws to a close with the empire in a state of flux. The foundations laid by Augustus had held for nearly a century, but his successors had shown how personal flaws, court intrigue, and unchecked power could destabilize the entire system. As Rome plunged into the year of the four emperors, the need for a new dynasty, one that could restore stability and re-legitimize the imperial office, became more urgent than ever. The stage was set for the Flavian dynasty, which would soon rise from the ashes of civil war. But that is a story for the next chapter in our imperial timeline.